Dr. Corey Yeager, it's such a pleasure to have you here. We're really looking forward to speaking to you today. I'm already a big fan, by the way. I'm a big fan because you have a career across two areas that I have a lot of passion for, and that's sport and athletics and therapy and healing. Without the two in my life, I don't know where I'd be. Honestly, it's been a big cornerstone for my career and who I am as a person. And you've certainly had a profound career as a therapist. You've worked with various teams and organizations, including the Detroit Pistons, who you work with today, the Oprah Winfrey Network, and you've just written a new book. And from all the work you've done over your career, I'm so fascinated that what brought you to write this book in particular? How am I doing? The book is called 40 Conversations to Have with Yourself. Please tell us a bit more about it and what inspired you to write this book.
So the book was really inspired from the work that I do therapeutically, not just with athletes, but primarily with athletes. And over the course of my career and work athletes and other folks, I was asking these questions over and over. So I went about putting those questions together in a way that I could say, hey, we do a great job as human beings of asking others how they're doing, engaging with others, being curious with others. But we do a really poor job of doing that same or having that same level of curiosity with ourselves. So the book really comes from the fact that I was asking people these questions over and over and over in therapy. And then I would go away and think about the session and ask myself these questions. I'm like, well, maybe that's something that we could do a better job of, is getting these questions, some of these questions out, because I mean, this is 40 of them, but I have a heck of a lot more than that, to people so they can be curious with themselves, so they can start the process of discovery with self, which is an important process, but we're really not taught to discover ourselves. We're taught to really engage others, learn about others, be curious with others, but not with ourselves. So that's really the genesis of where the book came from.
Are there common themes that come up? Are there common questions that you find as you go through this book and in your research for the book?
Yeah, I mean, so the book is really, again, kind of a set of 40 questions that I think people should ask themselves. So I'll ask you two a question that I love. I ask everyone this question, all the clients, all my players. Who in this world knows you best? What would you say? Who's the one person that knows you best?
Yeah, I would probably say my mother.
Yeah, Anna?
I would probably say my husband. Yeah.
So I would challenge both of you and say, I think you're both wrong, and I've just met you. You know why? Because you know yourself better than anyone else. So there are things that your mom knows about you that no one else knows. But there are also things that your friends or someone else knows that your mom doesn't know. So the only person that holds all of the information on you is yourself. Yeah. But we'll quickly move to say someone else knows us better. But if we take the time to really think about that, that can't be true. My wife knows me. My wife knows me really well. You better believe that my friends have things they know about me that my wife will never hear, ever, ever hear. Right? So I am the only one that holds every ounce of information, all the knowledge about who Corey is. So why wouldn't I take the chance to be more curious with knowing that version of myself? Because it means I'll show up as a better therapist in my world. I'll show up as a better husband, a better father in my world, because I know myself better.
You're so right. The extent to which we know ourselves determines how well we can actually inspire and know other people. I mean, I've learned that lesson over my time. And certainly, I'm fascinated as well because I know what it's like to be an athlete, and you obviously do a lot of work with athletes. And I guess over my time as an athlete, my ego, ensuring we have a strong ego is so important, right? And I see that across businesses as well. The work I now do with a lot of leaders is that, you have to have a pretty tough personality in order to be able to perform at that level. Yeah. And so how do you bring the work of therapy where, letting go of that ego, letting go of that personality is actually fundamental to being a better performer? How do you coach and convince these high level performers that vulnerability is actually one of your greatest strengths?
Oh, this is a great question. So one of the things that I talk to players about, our head coach, or all the coaches I work with, high-level athletes, I talk about the ego. And one of the things that people say very quickly is, well, I have no ego. It's about the team. No, we all have egos. So it's not a question if we have ego. You better have ego if you're going to be a high-level athlete. You better be driven by an ego. The question is not if you have an ego, it's do you know how to check it when it's time to be checked? This is really the question. I think it's a fake version to say, well, I have no ego. It's just about everyone else. No, it's not. No, self-interest drives everything that we do. We can dance around that if we want, but we are all driven by self-interest. Everything we do. I and my wife chose to be parents. It was driven by self-interest because we wanted to be seen as great parents. Oh my God, they're great. Their kids are so good. Their parents must have done a great job. That was self-interest. So I can dance around that and try to deny that and say, well, it's not about me. I'm telling the story. I lie to myself. So this is what I talk to players and high-level athletes about, is learning how to check that ego in the context of the team when it's needed. And unleashing that ego when you need to say, Kobe Bryant would say at the end of the game, you better swing it my way. I don't care who else is on the court. There's 8 seconds left in this game. None of you have worked as hard as I have. The timeout comes. Give me the ball, clear out, and ISO me. That's what we're doing. That's all ego, but it worked because in the context of the team, he was going to be the best option at the end of the game. Right, but there would be other moments that Kobe would say, "Hey, I got to get people involved. I got to get my teammates involved, so I keep them going and they play good defense." This is understanding the ego in such a way that not only does the individual benefit, but now the team and the organization benefits from that understanding. So I think this concept you talk about of vulnerability is a concept that we don't do a great job of understanding. Vulnerability is a really courageous space to occupy. You have to be very courageous to be vulnerable. And the other thing that vulnerability calls for, Brené Brown talks about this in her work, that it really calls for a high level of trust. I'm not going to be vulnerable with you if I don't trust you. So how do I develop that trusting process and that level of courage to be able to say, hey, I'm struggling with something. I just want to share it with you. And I want to get this off my chest, and I think it'll make things better for me and us in general. But I have to be vulnerable. That's not easy to do, but once we do it, it's freeing. We can be more free.
And I love the quote by Brené Brown: "Vulnerability in me is weakness, but vulnerability in you is strength." It's such a misconception, isn't it, that we have, and when we can turn that around and really think about it, well, we can empower ourselves far more greatly.
That's right, because it's okay for everyone else. If everyone else is vulnerable, that's fine. But when it's my turn, I don't want to do that. That means I have to share deep, dark secrets about me. The other thing that we also know about vulnerability is wherever I know I have vulnerability, I'll seek to hide it. If I know I'm vulnerable, I went into a PhD program. I wasn't a good writer at all. A PhD program will call that out very quickly. But I tried to hide it. Hey, I had my wife help. She's a pretty good writer, edit. But she didn't understand the technical aspects of my doctoral research. So I was struggling until I told my professors, hey, I'm really struggling with my writing. My advisor said, well, I know because I'm reading it and it's horrible. But let's go about fixing that. Then I was vulnerable. It freed me. I'm a really good writer now because it freed me to be able to say, hey, I'm not great at it. I'm not supposed to be great at it yet, but now it frees me to say, hey, teach me. And then I learned it. Right?
Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah. Sports can serve as such a great metaphor for life, for business. You talk about Kobe Bryant wanting the ball at the end of the game. I think Anna and I can relate to, wanting that big project, or wanting to take on that initiative. Let's talk about the workplace a little bit. I'm curious because sports psychology, mental health in sports has become something that is very accepted now. How do you do that in the workplace? How do you do that in business where, it's not totally accepted to be vulnerable in the workplace. It would probably benefit a lot of businesses overall, but companies are not going to come to you and say, do you need help with something? We all have things on our mind in our personal lives, but we can't shut that off during the day, but we have to try. What's the best approach there?
I don't know that we have to necessarily even try to shut it off. We have to understand the context of where we're at. So my mental wellness is always moving. It can never be really turned off. I can fake it like I've turned it off, but I'm still struggling inside. So I think that we're in the process. We've not arrived, and I think we're a long way from arriving at normalization of mental wellness. We haven't normalized it yet, because if you compare mental wellness, the normalization of the mental wellness process, to physical wellness is fully fully vested and fully normalized, right? You could say that you have diabetes or any of these things, and people will come to your aid. But if you say mental wellness, people will say, "Oh, I don't know what to do with that." Why? Because it's not normalized and not comfortable with it. They don't know what to do with it. So I think we're in the process of that normalization, with a long way to go. But when we talk about organizations, corporations, what can they do? I think that we've entered a new age. And I think it is an age that calls for therapeutic support on staff at corporations. Absolutely. Right? Someone that has a psychological background, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, that is on staff and available for folks. It's what I do with the Pistons. So I don't only work with the players, I work with the front office, I work with our support staff, our medical staff. So anyone that is in need of conversational support, I work with all of them. I think that corporations can take a dose from what the NBA has done in mandating that each organization have a mental wellness professional on staff, because people will utilize that process and it will help to normalize. It will help to say it's okay to have someone to talk to. So having someone on staff is a consideration. We also need to beef up the benefit packages within corporations and organizations that gives people a place to have more digitalized support, different ways that you can find support outside of the office setting, but you're still getting that support. I think there are steps that we can take, but again, I think with us just really beginning the push of normalization, many corporations aren't there yet. So the hope is that we move in that direction.
You speak my language in that sense, and you have the same vision, because I work with CEOs and executives all around the world. And it's often a case of, from my experience, there's usually one or two people in that executive team that, based on their pathology, are actually having an impact, a detrimental impact on the entire organization. Because as we know, the tone, the direction, the culture is set from the top of the organization. And so a lot of the work that I do is around how do we carefully, build, isolate the behavior of this person, but also build some sort of understanding around the potential issues that they have. And, we're talking about serious things. We're talking about narcissistic personality disorder. We're talking about things that are really difficult to talk about. So, how far do you think we are from actually achieving that in the corporate sense? Because that's a really difficult, but it's a very difficult but real reality that we're facing.
Yeah. So there was a philosopher, psychologist in the early 1900s. His name was Frantz Fanon. And he said that every single cohort of generations will have a mission. And the mission many times won't be discussed, but a generation will have a kind of a shared mission. I believe that this younger generation that we have, especially in the United States, but across the world, is much more demanding of this process of normalization in terms of mental wellness. They are demanding that we do something more. And I think corporations and organizations are hearing that demand. Now, they may be slow to move the process, because oftentimes you have leadership that have detrimental behaviors and they see the world differently and they may have struggles. But there are also leaders that are champions for this work. That how do we find those leaders that are champions that can push the agenda forward, and couple those champions with those folks that are within the organization that are demanding more. We need more support. We do want someone on staff that is here to support us. We need more options digitally that we can have mental wellness support. And if you don't get it today, guess what? The argument doesn't end. You keep pushing until we find those champions that will stand up and stand with others. We can then begin to push the process in a more meaningful way.
For business leaders who are watching this, why does this matter? What would you tell them for those who say, why do I have to do this? Is this really going to impact the bottom line? Are we going to see layoffs? Why does this matter?
Well, I mean, the return on investment is what folks want to know. What's my return on investment? Why would I do it? Well, there is a moral compass that we need to be led by. All right, so sometimes the moral compass is broken. So I can't, if my moral compass is broken, you can't follow me because it's broken. And I'm going to be wayward and nomadic and just walking in circles. But the return on investment, there was some research that was done that said like about every $1 that's spent in the mental wellness realm for corporations, there's a $4 return to the economy. That's a pretty good return on investment. To have people, employees that are more healthy physically and mentally means that they're not taking as many days off. There's not as many physical struggles because my mental is in a better space. So there is an ability to have a return on investment, but many times you have to spend on the front end to see it on the back end. That's how business works. Most successful businesses spend a lot on the front end. Why? Because they know there was a delayed gratification. I'll get something for this, but I have to spend on the front end. But we haven't gotten there yet. Again, this comes back to that concept of normalization. We haven't moved the needle drastically yet. I think we're in process. How long will that take? I don't know that we can put a time on it, but I would guess in the next decade, things will look quite different, especially coming off the pandemic. The demand for that support is much higher. I think in the next decade, if we look back at these moments, we'll have moved the needle in a pretty dramatic fashion.
That's great. And obviously, to really shift the needle, we need to have more of these courageous conversations, which you have already spoken about. So what advice would you give to an executive to be able to lead and facilitate these courageous conversations? How do you help a leader set that up for their executive team?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it starts with the individual. It's almost an ecological framework that before I can engage and follow the two of you in a process that I say, hey, they're doing really good work, I'm going to follow them. I must first ask some curious questions of myself. Where am I at in terms of what they're doing? Does it fit for me? What is my struggle? So doing that almost that checklist, that self-check first to see where you are in terms of mental wellness, asking those questions, asking and answering those questions of yourself, and then going out to that leadership team saying, hey, I've been thinking about something. So I didn't just come out of nowhere. I've been thoughtful about this. And now I think it's time for me to bring it to us as a leadership team, that I think it's time for us to do something more. I want to hear your thoughts, right? I think this is a critical aspect of making sure that others are engaged in the process, that not one champion can do this work, that they have to be part of a broader process that is engaging the collective in a way that can be much more productive.
Very interesting. How do you have a team, mentality? You talk about sports, and there certainly seems to be synergy in the NBA. How do you have that in the workplace? I mean, do you need, employees to kind of bind together and demand it, as you say, or what's the, how do you move forward?
I think it's a both end approach. I see all organizations as teams. They're all teams. Mm-hmm. I happen to be working for a basketball team, but every organization is a team. So the way in which that we can move that forward is all parties coming together to say, okay, where are we in terms of this mental wellness? Not just part of us, not just a portion of us, but where are we collectively in terms of where we stand with mental wellness? Almost that assessment of where you currently are, and then begging the question of, so where do we want to go? So now we know where we are. Where is it that we seek to go in terms of this mental wellness? And then once you have that outcome, that objective, now we have to have a plan, bite-sized approach to push that agenda forward so we can meet the needs of our organization.
A big part of what a lot of organizations are doing now is trying to facilitate, really exponential culture transformation. And I've seen it be so unsuccessful in so many different places, unfortunately. And my sense is that in order to successfully transform, there's a real healing that needs to happen within an organization. And I wonder if you share a similar view, and what do you think is the healing that's needed for some of these organizations that are struggling to redefine themselves, reinvent themselves, and build a really positive, supportive culture for the future?
Yeah, so I think when you say healing, I think this is a critical word. We must differentiate between healing and treatment. Two different things, both very important. My work is treatment work. I'm a therapist. So my job is to help treat individuals or groups. Healing can only occur within. So within the individual, within the organization, within the team is where the healing process must occur. Very important to have treatment, have psychologists, psychotherapists, whatever it is that can help to treat the organization in the way that it is needing, but to realize that treatment, for instance, I'll use a metaphor. If I cut my arm wide open, the first thing I'm going to do is go to the doctor and say, I got this huge cut. What are they going to do? Well, they're going to clean it out. They're going to put an ointment in it, and they're going to sew it up. But the body will go about the process of healing it, right? So there's that treatment versus that healing. So where are we organizationally? Because you're going to have to go through this treatment process before that healing can really take seed. So I think recognizing the difference in the two is critical for an organization. Where are we? How can treatment be helpful? What does treatment look like? Do we understand the difference between a psychologist and a therapist? Which one are we looking for? There's a concept called psychoeducation that I think organizations really need. What is psychoed? Well, psychoed is saying, hey, so as an organization, I want you to know that a psychologist is trained to assess. A psychotherapist is trained to do therapy. A psychiatrist is an MD that can prescribe medication that focuses in the psychological realm. This psychoeducation is quite important. So we know what we have to figure out what it is our organization is in need of. Now that treatment can occur, then this process of healing can occur. So it's an iterative process, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. That's great. Neil?
Yeah, before we wrap up, Anna, I just, I'm curious, and you don't have to mention any specifics, obviously, but do you have a mental health success story that you can share with us?
Well, I think there's a ton of mental health success stories. I can just kind of group a few into one. Having a number of people that have come to me seeking change is really my work. And so I've had a lot of people that come in with anxiety, presenting with depression, tons of different things. And the most successful, I believe, is simple, but I think it's very true for me. The most success story that I can have is making someone else aware of who they are and how they got to be. So you can't change anything without better understanding how it is that you got to that space. So doing the work of digging into the root system of problems and struggles before you start to attack them. So I've got tons of stories about people coming in, seeking change, engaging, better understanding, becoming aware of themselves in the context of others, and then moving in a way that they could do their own healing. But I think just in telling the story of change to individuals and understanding how they seek change and being part of that process is really an overarching story of success. And I think that's really the work that I do, and it's what I'm interested in helping people understand.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for such a wise, thought-provoking conversation. And where can we find your book when it is available?
You can find it at all the major outlets, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's going to be at all the major outlets. You can find it online. How am I doing? 40 conversations to have with yourself. You can Google my name. I'm on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Dr. Corey Yeager. You can find it if you Google my name. It's going to be everywhere.
We enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.